Hello and welcome to Talking Live. We are talking about a very important topic, laziness. It's a term you've definitely heard about. Dr. Devon Price is a professor and a social psychologist at Loyola University. And Devon just came out with a new book called Laziness Does Not Exist. We are going to dig deep into this conversation. Dr. Price, thank you for joining us today.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me.
Congratulations on your new book. Very exciting. What got you interested in this topic of laziness?
Uh, so I was someone who was always very workaholic myself. So I was definitely um, always had absorbed that kind of cultural lie that's very widespread, that just your worth is your productivity, and the way that you get ahead, especially if you are dealing with any marginalization in your life, is to really just be really committed, really achieve your way out of any problems. And I was someone who was playing by that kind of rule set that society sets out for so many of us. And on paper, I was kind of succeeding. I finished my PhD when I was 25. I had a postdoc right after that. I was doing all these things that like look virtuous on paper. And I was totally miserable. And as soon as I finished graduate school, I got a really horrible fever that basically lasted from February until November of that year that I graduated. So it really started me questioning whether all of this achievement pursuit was really worth it. And around the same time, I was also here at Loyola teaching a lot of working adults, so people who are juggling a million things, kids, work, and taking classes. And I was just so stunned by how many of them would constantly apologize for being lazy. They had really absorbed this message that if they missed a deadline, or if they forgot about something, or they were too overwhelmed to start a paper, it was because they were lazy. And so for me, that was a big moment of, okay, something is not adding up here, no matter
The
how
light went
much you
off.
do.
The
Yes.
light went off. Now, did you consider yourself lazy? Because when I was reading through your book, it just sounded to me like you were an overachiever, that you were a great student. You absorbed the value of working hard from your parents who worked very hard. It was hard for me to imagine that you would label yourself lazy at any point in your life.
Yeah, that's the kind of absurd thing. For this book, I've interviewed a lot of people suffering from burnout and a lot of really high achieving people. And all of those people, myself included, have called themselves lazy at one point or another. And in fact, a lot of the people that I spoke to, and this is true of myself too, like when you ask them, how do you have the energy to do all these things? It seems like you're doing more than could be healthy for you. A lot of people respond with, oh, actually, it's because I'm so lazy. I know that deep down I'm this slothful person, and I have to really drive myself to succeed. And I know for me, it was definitely the case that I just didn't trust my own feelings and limits. I didn't ever trust myself to get things done. And so that's why I was constantly overcommitting, basically.
You talk a lot about kind of how we feel like we need to measure up to some standard, and culturally there are such high expectations for individuals to achieve whatever is considered successful, and it seems to me that no one can ever measure up to that ideal.
Absolutely. And there's so many ideals in so many realms of life too. So even if, let's say, you are a workaholic who's really achieving at work, I mean, if your job is anything like my job, there's always some little committee you're supposed to be on, or some other task you're
Yeah.
supposed to be doing. So it never really ends. And then once you come home, it's, oh, my house is so messy, or I'm really not volunteering enough. I'm really not getting out enough to enough protests. I'm not cooking enough healthy meals. My Instagram looks really ugly. Like there's so many things to feel insecure about. And
And what I
because,
noticed too, I actually, my son is a senior in college, and we were just having this discussion, now that it's the holidays and things are slowing down a little bit, how hard it is to slow down and to give ourselves permission to say, it is okay to do nothing. There's an art in doing nothing. And yet we don't really allow ourselves that time.
Yeah, and I think it's only gotten worse by the information overload of the
Hmm.
internet now, especially the way the internet just is designed with advertisements everywhere, algorithms constantly putting new things in your face, lots
Yeah.
of misinformation spreading. There's just constant things vying for your attention and pressure for things that you're supposed to be doing. And just like unplugging and sitting in stillness feels really, really unnatural right now, and we feel really
That is
guilty
just
about
the
it.
perfect way to describe it. And yet you say that is the key to self-care, getting to a point where you can say no, which you described earlier in your life, not being able to do. And it's something I still struggle with. And I think the pandemic has only made it worse.
Yeah, yeah. In the book, I talk about the problem of work-life interference, which is just that struggle where you have, a work device in your hand all the time. So it's very hard to know when you're supposed to stop answering email or stop reading news articles or putting things into the world. And with the pandemic, it's gotten so much worse. Many corporations immediately reached for screen tracking and key logging software so they could monitor their employees' activities and make sure that
Oh,
they were constantly
that scares
working.
me. Doesn't that
It's
seem
really
illegal?
scary.
Doesn't that seem
Yeah, yeah,
illegal?
you're surveilling someone's home. Like it's so invasive and
I
so,
mean, what
so
people would find on my computer is a lot of jewelry searching, but fortunately, I work for myself, so I just need to check myself. But it's really true, and I have found this, and I've spoken to friends about this, how hard it is to set those boundaries between home and work life because so many people are home. Like, what's your excuse? Like, you can't say, oh, well, I have a meeting or I have a party, or because everyone knows that everyone else is grounded. So it makes it that much more complex to say no or to say, I'm taking off. We really do need modeling behavior to help us figure out how to protect ourselves from overscheduling.
yeah, and there's a really frightening illusion too, where because you're at home and you're working from home, technically any of your time could be spent working. So even if your productivity has gone up, and a big report came out in Forbes showing that throughout this year, worker productivity went up because people don't have
Mm-hmm.
commutes and all these other things. But people don't feel like they're being more productive because they notice all of the time that they technically could be working where they're doing a load of laundry or resting. So there's really no end to it. Every waking moment, if we succumb to that pressure, can be filled with activity and work, and we just really have to disrupt that.
Where does this idea come from where we are constantly putting so much pressure on ourselves to be productive, to work nonstop, or the side effect of not doing that is to have a lower sense of self-esteem?
So in the book, I kind of track it to, in America, its roots are really in the Protestant work ethic and Puritanism. So some of the earliest people who settled and colonized the US had an ideology where if you worked really hard, that was a sign that you had been blessed. And if you were depressed or didn't have a drive, that meant that was evidence you had already been damned, basically. And that ideology was also really useful for indoctrinating enslaved people and indentured workers into really exploiting and sucking as much energy out of them as possible. If you equate work with being morally good, you can really
Mm-hmm.
brainwash people and facilitate exploiting them. And so that's been really the bedrock of this country, and certainly has spread throughout the world. And then it got even more popular after industrialization, when you started having these really pull yourself up by your bootstraps
Yes.
narratives, that hard work can supposedly make you ascend through the class ranks, even though statistically that's really, really rare, especially now.
When I got my training, and you're a social psychologist, so you tend to look at the broader picture and how that impacts an individual. And I tend to work with individuals, helping them understand the culture at large. And when I was in my own treatment, which is part of the training to be a therapist, I remember referring to myself as lazy because I was a late bloomer in school, and there were times I had a homework assignment or a class, or many classes actually, that I was just like, peace out. And my therapist at the time said, laziness is a symptom for other things. And what I love about your book is really it's a call to action for everyone to question the term laziness. And it's from a different vantage point, the way you talk about it and the way I talk about it. But really, it is a symptom for other things. So if we take your advice and identify laziness is a lie, then we're left with understanding, okay, if laziness doesn't exist, what is it? Maybe it's depression. Maybe it's hopelessness. Maybe it's low self-esteem. Did you find the same thing?
Yeah, I think absolutely. Basically, once we take away the moral condemnation that is the word lazy and just ask ourselves, okay, what am I feeling? Am I feeling apathy? Am I feeling dread? Am I feeling exhaustion? Am I feeling
Mm-hmm.
burnout? That lets you figure out what's going on psychologically with you. And that can also help you look at the broader picture and see if there's things in your environment that are also taking your power away or taking your energy away, because a lot of times it isn't, it can be internal things like depression, and it can also be external
Yeah.
factors like overly demanding families or living in
Yep.
a racist world or whatever the case may be, for a person. And laziness stops that interrogation, because then it just says, oh, it's your fault that you feel this way. And so once you get rid of that judgment and that condemnation, then you can start inspecting. And often it's a variety of different things that explain
It's
it.
a liberating idea, and I'm so glad that you speak to it, because one of the most powerful stories in the book I found in your book was the description of you having the flu. And because you were on this workaholic mode, how long lasting it was. And really, you didn't know what it was. And doctors were stumped as well for a long time.
Yeah, it was so bizarre. It was like clockwork. Like the day after I finished my dissertation, pretty much, I started getting a really intense fever, like 103-degree fever, every night in the evening. And during the day, I could have some energy to get a few things done, but I just felt this like ticking time clock every day of my energy just really being really limited and restricted. And every night for almost 9 months, I just was completely waylaid and, shivering even when it was 90 degrees out. And the only answer to it was to finally stop, because even when I had that fever, I was still trying to work a full-time job. I was still trying to get, 5 miles of exercise every day. It was just absurd. I
Oh
had to
my
finally
God.
just kind of go, enough. This isn't working. Like, I
So
need to
I
just
would say you're
rest.
also a recovering perfectionist as well. And you mentioned how you really worked on making this transition from saying yes to everything and everyone and burning yourself out to really learning a different way to approach life so that you weren't so drained. What was the turning point for you, and what's the secret to setting these boundaries?
Oh, I don't know if there was a turning point. There's certainly after I was sick and I finally had stopped trying to get a diagnosis and realized all that would work is just resting. That was a big breakthrough moment for me. And then a few months after that, just noticing how many students of mine needed reassurance that they were enough and that they were actually doing too much. That was a big breakthrough moment for me. But also, this stuff is so ingrained that I still find it lurking in my brain in one way or
Yeah.
another. And, so then I had to kind of tear down the rules that I had about how much exercise I needed to do every week or whatever, or what my diet needed to look like, or how I spend money. I had so many rules about doing things virtuously and perfectly and working hard and being diligent. And so I have to constantly look for that in myself and see, am I equating suffering with being good? And who is that helping? And I think also practicing being compassionate and generous to other people, that is what really helped me unlock it and learn how to do it for myself. So that was probably the biggest element.
And you're probably a rule follower.
I am and I am not. Like there are a lot of rules in society that I'm like suspicious of. I think partly because I'm non-binary, so like gender rules were always like, this doesn't make any sense to me. I don't fit here. But I set a lot of rules for myself about I need to get this done by this time. I need to reply to
Yeah.
this email so fast that people are impressed. Things like that. It's
Yes.
very rigid.
The struggle is real, and I think it's ongoing. And I think whenever we have a tendency to go, 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 and people who are ambitious and really love their field, there is that pull to learn more and to do more. we probably need to check ourselves more regularly. And that's probably true for a lot of people. I thought you said something really fascinating that I'd love you to explain to our audience, how the laziness lie may have helped spread the coronavirus.
Yeah. So the laziness lie ultimately is all about kind of moralizing individual behavior and ignoring the systems and structures around us that kind of keep us down or explain our behavior. So with the coronavirus, especially the response in the United States, there was a lot of talk about individual choices and whether individual people were acting morally or trying hard enough to control the spread, and not enough talk about, is the government doing enough to support us in making good choices? Do we have systems in place to help protect us? So for example, I'm in Chicago, and every time there's a spike in cases, our mayor is on the television talking about how people are being bad and having house parties, and it's individuals being irresponsible, instead of acknowledging we didn't have much testing for months. We still don't have really any contact tracing in this city. And there are a lot of other structures. We don't have rent relief. We don't have eviction moratoriums that are going to last long enough. So people are having to go into work. There's all these systems that explain patterns of behavior. It's not about everybody needing to just like white knuckle their way through this, because that's not realistic. People need support to make the quote unquote right decision.
That is such a great point. What are the three main tenets of the laziness lie?
Yeah, the three tenets of the laziness lie are that your worth is your productivity, that you can't trust your own needs and feelings and limitations. And then the third is that there's always more that you could be doing. And so those are the three beliefs that really just make us doubt ourselves when we feel exhausted, feel guilty for needing a break, and really just moralize how much we're doing and achieving. And, we also direct that at other people as well.
When someone is doing that to themselves or judging others, because we tend to judge others the way we judge ourselves, what do you think the answer is? What will help us get out of this loop? I know Ariana Huffington has really talked a lot about how important rest is and taking a break. And she certainly has tried to change the conversation when it comes to this go, go, go mentality.
Yeah, I think the first thing to do is to kind of notice when you're having those reactions of, oh, I'm so lazy. Oh, I feel so guilty because I didn't get to everything on my to-do list. It's okay to have those feelings. Those have been really drilled into us. So observe them and then kind of question, okay, what needs do I have that are not getting met? What are the barriers that are getting in the way of me getting something done? And also, one thing that I mentioned in the book that I think is really important is clarifying your values. So just like start from the assumption that you can't do everything. You can't be everything. You're probably already doing too much.
I love that, because that is not our assumption. Our assumption is we can do everything. And not only that, we should do everything.
Yeah. Sometimes we just need to give ourselves permission to be human, to not be able to do everything. Recognize that you're just really overstimulated with demands, and then ask yourself, okay, if I only get one thing done today, what's the most important thing? What's the thing that will feel authentic and enriching to me? And can I let other things drop? People are always trying to take on new responsibilities. It's a new year, so of course people are going to be thinking about what new things they should be doing or how they should be changing their lives. And I think the change most people need is to give themselves permission to let go of a few things.
I think that is the most important point as we move into 2021. And let everybody know where they can find you. And also, your book is coming out. When's the exact date? I know it's in January.
January 5th. So yeah, and my writing is at devonprice.medium.com, and you can find me on pretty much every social media, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook at Dr. Devon Price, and that's DEVONPRICE.
Perfect. Laziness does not exist. Dr. Devon Price, thank you so much for joining us, and your words of wisdom are so needed right now. So thank you from me personally.
Thanks so much for having me.